Yeah, well, I knew no one in the Hollywood system. I knew no one who worked in the movie business. I grew up in the Midwest, went to school for engineering and architecture, and I happened to hit architecture school at kind of the perfect time when all these digital tools were coming in to the curriculum. So I learned, 3D, I learned digital video, editing, and after getting out of architecture school, I realized, I could essentially had the tools to make my own films. So that's what I did. I started making little short films, and luckily one of them got noticed and put in a little film festival, and so that was the beginning. A creative at Nike saw it and asked me to do a little commercial for Nike, very, very low budget. And then I did that, and then they asked me to do another one, and slowly I had, suddenly I had a little reel that I could use to kind of try to get, bigger commercials, and that's kind of how it started, 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 and that's kind of how it started. I think directors can come from anywhere. Some people come out of doing plays and dramas. Some come through film school, but it's one of those jobs where you can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter where you're from. All that really matters is what you've made. Your reel is kind of everything. So, and that way it's kind of a great profession because it's open to everybody. I moved out here to Los Angeles and signed with a production company, and it's that first year was tough. It's hard to break in. Even if you've got a reel, because once you start working professionally, no one wants to take the risk on the new guy, regardless. That first year in commercials taught me a lot about the other side of directing.
So I'm gonna go see if it's
certainly,
on.
Knowing how the camera works and doing your storyboards and having the vision is a very important part of it. But there's another side that I think they don't really teach you in school, and that's how to sell your ideas. The commercial, that first year in commercials is a really good lesson for me in not only having the idea and having the vision, but learning how to communicate it, how to sell it, because that's really what gets you the job. What gets you the job? 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 Yeah, so I did commercials for a couple years, and all the time I was doing commercials, I was taking what are called general meetings around Hollywood, where basically, you take a meeting with a film exec, usually a junior exec, when you're first coming in, and they get to know you a little bit. You talk about your reel, what you're interested in. They talk to you about projects they're developing. You try to see if there's a good fit. Maybe you find a script that's broken and needs someone to come in and bring some ideas to it and develop it. So I did that. I was doing that with a movie called Logan's Run at Warner Brothers. That was one of my first projects. And then I had a meeting with the producer of TRON Legacy, Sean Bailey. And we had a meeting and sat down, and I kind of talked about what I remembered of the original movie and what my vision was for what the movie could be. And, I used kind of one of my commercial tricks, which I said, rather than talk about TRON Legacy, I mean, we could talk about all day, but what I'd really have to do is kind of show you what I'm thinking. So I asked Disney to give me a little bit of money to actually shoot kind of a teaser trailer for a movie that didn't exist. Okay. So I did a 2-minute short teaser that kind of showed the world and had a little bit of story, some of the main, characters that might be in the film. And we made that kind of in secret. And then in 2008, we decided, the studio let me show it at Comic-Con. Wow. And due to the response from the audience and then the internet at large, we greenlit the movie. So that was kind of my path in a few quick years.
So you took the initiative to do it, you proposed the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's kind of what I learned in that year of, that first year in commercials is how important it is to be able to show someone what you're talking about, especially when you're working in something visual like films and commercials. You can talk about all day, and that's important, to talk about your ideas, but if you can show them something that can, like I say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, so that was kind of my way.
And so with the commercials, you were on the cutting edge there for a bit, you were one of the first ones to use the F-23, the Sony
Right.
F-23.
Yeah, the F-23. Yep. In the age when it was shooting Viper, you know. Yeah, we used the F-23 on a Hummer commercial, and then we used, I think, one of the first F-35s on Tron Legacy in a 3D rig, and then the F-65 we used on Oblivion, which is a 2D film. But for me, the 8K sensor in that camera just captured the texture of these landscapes in Iceland that I wanted to shoot, and I think is still top, one of the top camera out there. Yeah, and I've even shot with the new, F-55, a couple commercials with that. So I always like to play with the latest gear and see what's out there.
Right. So you like visual effects based films, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like great stories, but my background in design, I think, lent myself to doing science fiction films because there is a world that has to be created, and I always loved films as a kid that were, kind of transported me to another place, and science fiction, I think, can not only stimulate the eye, but the mind. So that's why I was kind of drawn to those films. But I'm open to anything. I've got historical movies in development, a lot of different stuff, racing movies, science fiction, a little bit of everything. 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 Science fiction, yeah, from the very beginning. I mean, it's a look as part of it. Sometimes it's a technical requirement. So for instance, on Tron, we did fully lit suits that were practical. And they were beautiful, but they weren't that bright. So we needed a camera that was able to capture work in very low light. So that at that point, the F-35 at ASA 320 with master primes wide open was kind of the package that allowed us to capture the light of the suits. On Oblivion, Claudio and I wanted to try to go beyond blue screen with one of the main sets in the film, which was called the Sky Tower, which is essentially a house with wraparound glass views that's at 3,000 feet above the ground. So all you see is kind of clouds drifting by. And since a large part of the movie was set there, I knew if we could figure out a practical solution to capture everything in camera, then we would save a lot of money on visual effects. And also we could do things that you can't do with a blue screen set. So we went to the top of a volcano in Maui and shot all these panoramic sky plates that were then reprojected on a screen around the set. And again, we needed something that was very sensitive to light to capture and make that feel like daylight. And the F-65, I think, is an 800 ASA rated camera. Again, with the master primes wide open, we were able to capture that daylight effect and do things you just couldn't do normally if you'd done blue screen. And, save a lot of money, which is great. 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 We shot a Nissan spot last year that was all nighttime Los Angeles. It was basically a guy zip lining between skyscrapers in downtown LA, and I wanted to do it practically. So we knew we were shooting available light nighttime Los Angeles, and the F-55, I think you can push to 1250.
1250 native.
Yeah, so we were able to kind of capture Los Angeles nighttime in a way, in a really, and I liked that kind of compact form factor. So, we're always looking for what's the best out there, and always testing it on every project, and trying to find the right fit for the right project, 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 for the right. I always have just liked the way that the Sony cameras render color and skin tones. I find that the colors are very natural out of the box and very neutral. So that it's very easy for me to grade, whether it's going a cooler look or a warmer look. So and then obviously the low light requirements of the projects I've worked on so far have kind of just that sensitivity. And then the F-65, just that 8K sensor, I think for widescreen epic landscape shots, capturing all that detail, that sensor to me was really a breakthrough. So yeah, it's just happened. It's happened to be the one. We always test everything,
right.
And I can't always guarantee that Sony will be the winner. but so far it's
so
been,
far it has been.
yeah, so far it's been really our tool of choice, 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 our tool of choice. Well, I always think about the big screen experience. I was always, a fan of David Lean and Stanley Kubrick and those directors who thought about, working for the big screen, the wide landscape shots that really transport you. So I've always kind of lent myself to that type of style of shooting. But yeah, my solution for IMAX on the last two films has been to shoot full frame for IMAX. So whether that's 16 by 9 on the F-35 or 1.9 on the F-65, I always shoot full frame for those particular formats for IMAX. And then I have a 240 guideline on my monitor, which is my, my 240, which is generally for the general release, which to me is kind of my favorite aspect ratio. I just love that horizontal format. Right. And that's the way it lives on Blu-ray. But for IMAX, I always like to do something special, something special, something special, something special, something special. Well, in my experience, I came through commercials, so I found that working in commercials first was great training for working in the studio system, working on studio movies. Because in commercials, you are working for the agency and the client. You have a vision for it, you have an idea, but ultimately you're doing it for them. So the trick and what I learned in commercials is how to get something you want to do and make sure they're happy at the same time. And that can be negotiation. Hopefully you figure out at the beginning that you're both going down the same path. But just the process of, creating something and then managing it all the way through the post process, all the way through the sound mix and visual effects and color. There's so many places a project can kind of go off the rails if a director's not there to kind of babysit it. So the working commercials, I think, was great training for learning how to preserve or figuring out how to preserve your idea, preserve your vision.
A lot more freedom to operate
In commercials?
yeah, versus feature film?
Actually I would say in features I feel like there's more freedom because you in the studio are, you're trying to tell a story. In commercials, you're certainly, the client's main goal is to sell a product. So it's a slightly different goal, and sometimes selling the product will certainly take precedence over creating a piece of art or telling a story. You see lots of car commercials out there that have a lot of running footage of the car and maybe a couple little shots of people, and maybe it looks like there might have been a story there, but ultimately it got edited out when the client said, I'd want to see more car.
Right.
So in commercials, it can kind of fall by the wayside. You always have your director's cut, hopefully, but I find that in features, the director, you have more freedom. You're telling a story, and commercials are great because the time cycle from getting the boards, shooting it and finishing it can be a couple of weeks,
right,
which is great. Turnaround. Whereas on a feature, you can develop something for 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years
before you even shoot it.
Wow.
So
and then the production itself could be 6, 8, 7,
yeah,
7 months, 8
yeah.
months.
I mean, TRON was 2.5 years from shooting to finishing.
Wow.
So, so the time frame of commercials is great. It's a great place to experiment with new cameras, experiment with crew, try different techniques. Right. It's a much faster paced world. So it's great to have, I find, to kind of keep a foot in both and bounce between them and bounce between them and bounce between them and bounce between them as director, you have to have multiple plates spinning all the time. Right. Movies aren't really greenlit until very late in the process. Sometimes just a few months before you go to photography. So it's important that you've always got multiple plates spinning, a couple of features. For me, I've got 5 or 6 features, 3 television shows, and commercials, on the side.
Very busy.
Yeah, well, you have to. You have to keep moving because the reality is most projects that studios put in development never get made. Most commercials that come to you end up not happening because they change their mind and go a different direction, or the commercial gets canceled. Television shows, might not get selected by the network. So the success ratio of any project is very slim in the system. So it's important to figure out how to develop them, to keep them alive, but also know that at any point anything could kind of drop off or get canceled, and you've got to jump on
Right.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump on
Right.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump on
Right.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump on
Right.
something else. Yeah. I always start with storyboards. I think it's important to stay as fast and loose at the beginning as possible. So I will, like on a feature, I'll look at all the sequences that I want to storyboard. I don't think it's necessary, at least for me, to storyboard a whole movie. Dramatic scenes, things like that, I find like storyboards can kind of limit you. You want to make sure you give your actors the freedom to bring ideas to the set. So you should certainly know what you want, but I rarely storyboard the whole movie. Then out of everything I storyboard, I'll even be more selective in what I previs. Focusing on really complicated action, sequences that have a lot of visual effects in it, so that you know on the day you can either show the actor or talk to the crew about what's going to be in the scene that isn't there. But I think previs, I think you can overuse it. I think you can use it as a crutch. So I like to be selective in using it only for what I have to, boarding the rest, and then other scenes, you know, just making sure you have in your mind what the scene's about and give yourself an opportunity to work with the actors and discover something you might not have thought of, something you might not have thought of, something you might not have thought of, something you might not have thought of. I mean, I love it. Unfortunately, you know, we shot Oblivion in 4K, but it was ultimately distributed in 2K. The DCP standard right now for distributing films, I don't believe, maybe they've changed it, but at least at the time we released Oblivion, they didn't have a higher bit rate for 4K. So you're essentially delivering this extra resolution through the same narrow pipe. Also, when it comes to visual effects, there is a little bit of a hit for doing 4K because you're talking about 4 times the amount of pixels that need to render. So I haven't been able to distribute one of my movies in 4K. I'm hoping that the next one I do, we will, because I think, especially for big screens, you know, IMAX or 50 or 60-foot screens, that extra sharpness, that extra clarity makes it even more kind of transportative. I definitely prefer 4K over higher frame rates. That's my preference. And then I think when you combine 4K with, you know, the advances in 3D with, you know, laser projection, get some really exciting kind of technology that's going to be kind of coming together in the next few years.
Right, and with the advancements of the 4K sensor technology, especially with what Sony develops, you've got a parallel advancement in dynamic range, colorimetry, signal to noise. So there's other characteristics that come along in addition to the resolution that overall makes a better picture. So,
yeah, very clean image, very sharp, and like you said, the sensitivity makes it possible to do a lot more available light stuff.
Right, and with the 4K televisions now more commonplace into the home and the OTT services, over-the-top services, Netflix, Amazon, and so forth, mandating 4K for distribution, it's
great.
certainly going prime time.
It's very exciting.
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 Prime time.
It's very exciting. Oh, wow. That's tough, you know. They're all like children of mine. But I will say going to Iceland, shooting out in the middle of Iceland, you know, on a mountain peak.
With Oblivion, right?
With Oblivion, yeah. Just going to a place that you would never be able to go to. You know, it was basically, we shot in a mountain that you could only get to by helicopter. We helicoptered in the Technocranes, the crew, and on that mountain peak, you know, shooting Tom Cruise, overlooking, you know, Iceland. That's one of those, it was just, you know, it was an adventure. It was what I always imagined directing was like, you know.
Uncharted territory.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of those days, certainly I'll never forget. 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 We shot, in the last shot of that commercial, you see the fire team, the group of players dive into this hole. And we actually shot that for real at the Cave of Swallows in central Mexico. It's a 1,000-foot deep hole, and we had our brave cameraman, Łukasz, with an F-65 strapped to his chest. We lowered him down on a rappelling line about 1,000 feet to the bottom of the cave, and he caught that last shot looking up. So we've gotten to go to some pretty amazing places. Yeah.
That's quite a spectacular commercial, and it's also long form, right? It was
like a 2-minute piece for the internet. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very visual effects heavy.
Yeah, it was like shooting a movie. I mean, it was essentially my Oblivion crew, Claudio and Łukasz and Rob Alonso. Yeah, Alex Carr. Yeah, so it was the Oblivion team going on a little adventure. Mexico, Utah, Los Angeles. You know, shot over a course of 2 weeks.
Extraordinary! You turned it around so quickly.
Yeah, we had like 3 weeks for post.
3 weeks.
Yeah, so Eric Barba at Digital Domain, who was my visual effects supervisor in the last 2 movies, handled that. And yeah, it was just fun. It was a, you know, run and gun fast-moving little project for a cool game.
How long were you in the storyboard process, the pre-production process for that particular
Oh, just
project?
a couple weeks.
Couple of weeks?
Yeah, just
Very
a couple
fast.
weeks, very fast. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's good. It makes you, teaches you how much you can get done in a short amount of time. The feature pipeline is so slow, you get this sense of, you can just kind of feel like your feet are stuck in the mud. But commercial shows you just how fast you can move. 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 Shows you just how fast. Well, I didn't quit architecture school. I did graduate, just for the record. I did graduate. But I looked at the career of being an architect, which is a long, hard one, and could be decades before you get your first commission to do a building. And then I looked at all these kind of digital tools and these ideas I had and stories, and realized, after I made that first film, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were watching it, online, and how amazing it was that you could, with these tools, you could kind of make your own films and share it with the world. So it was a pretty easy, at least for me, an easy choice to kind of veer away from architecture. And the truth is, I feel like I've built so much with the movies I've done. I've kind of still get to scratch that architecture itch. And I work with, actually, I have a lot of former classmates of mine are working on my movies now, helping build the sets. It was this little short film called Desert House. And it basically was my senior thesis architecture project about this little house. And I made a movie about a guy kind of discovering it. It was all shot from first-person, handheld point of view, but it was all done in 3D. And there was one little live-action portion of a guy. You saw the guy from like a thermal camera far away inside the house, and that's actually me. That's my only cameo, just because I was making it by myself. But that little short 2-minute film was in something called ResFest, and that's what got noticed.
Is it online? Can people see it?
I'm sure it's on. I think it's on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, it's on YouTube?
I'm sure you could find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
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 That's great.
I'm sure it's out. What I like about the F65 is just the resolution. It's an 8K sensor that kind of squeezes down to 4K, and all those extra pixels, you actually appreciate them. Even in 2K, even on the Blu-ray, you can just appreciate how sharp that camera was. So I loved how in the shots of Iceland, which is this amazing place, it's all volcanic. It's a volcanic island. It all has this black sand with moss clinging to these hills. The texture is so unique.
Right, extraordinary geographic detail.
Yeah,
right?
and
capturing all of it.
And yeah, F65 was able to capture that. So I really enjoyed it.
But there's a key scene in the film that Claudio speaks of often. There's a candlelit scene between the Tom Cruise and
Morgan Freeman. Yeah, Morgan. The one with Andrea.
The dinner table scene.
Yeah, there's two of them. There's one where Morgan lights a cigar.
Right.
Where that flame is kind of the light for the scene, which is pretty insane. Right. And then there's a scene, another scene in the film, a dinner scene between Andrea Riseborough and Tom, which is only lit with one candle on the table, and then the nighttime projection screens in the background.
Right, right. So Claudio speaks often of that scene, the low light sensitivity of the camera, which is another major component to selecting
that's the best I've seen so far in terms of low light. Yeah, we were really pushing the envelope there with that scene. 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 Wow. Well, I've got my favorite directors I've been following for years. So I make sure I see any Ridley Scott movie, any David Fincher movie. I think Neil Blomkamp, who's a friend of mine, has a movie coming out. I think it's for Sony actually, Chappie, in a couple weeks, which I'm looking forward to checking.
Oh, Chappie, yeah. There's the premiere in New York actually is coming up.
Yeah. So it looks great.
That's great.
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 So, well, I mean, I've shot so much with Claudio, because we're such a great team. And he was recommended to me by David Fincher, who had shot commercials with him and did Benjamin Button with him. Okay. So that's how I got to know Claudio. He and I did a commercial together in like 2008, and from there on, I just knew, he's certainly an artist above all else, but also very technical. And we just found that we were able to he understood aesthetically kind of what I was going for and knew how to accomplish it.
So you're in sync.
Yeah, so I've done both movies with him. I do, on commercials, I try other DPs out because Claudio's a very busy guy. So,
right. So again, commercials is another proving ground for cinematographers.
Yeah, you try other people. I just worked with this Swedish DP, Krilla Forsberg, who was fantastic on this spot I just shot. So it's I enjoy DPs. For me, there's kind of your creative partner on set, It's always changing, yeah. They say you make the movie when you write it, you make it again when you shoot it, and then you make it again when you edit it, and it's different each time, and that's so true. So usually, when you wrap photography, you give your editor a couple weeks to assemble the movie, which is essentially everything you've shot.
Which could be a lot.
Put together, yeah. It's usually too long, it's usually a half hour, 45 minutes longer than the movie should be, but it's everything you did. It's not necessarily the takes that you would have chosen, but it's your editor kind of picking stuff, which is good because you're seeing another perspective maybe on what you thought. But usually it's a really painful process watching that assembly for the first time because you just see how much work you have ahead of you, stuff that some stuff is not going to be in the movie. You're trying to find the story again. So and then usually you got about 3 months to put your first cut together to show the studio. And then you just continually refine and refine. You get lots of notes. And again, it's like I said in commercials, trying to maintain the vision, the movie you want to make, while dealing with the opinions and advice that's coming from hundreds of different directions.
But you don't have time to do that in commercials because the turnaround can be so tight.
It's pretty quick, yeah.
You really have to know.
It happens fast in commercials. Features that painful process can be drawn out over months. This 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 can be drawn. You can't post a movie forever. It costs money to edit it and do visual effects. So usually you have a schedule you stick to. Every movie I've done, we've been right up to the release of the movie has followed the finishing of post right to the day. So
great.
Yeah, so it's this crazy process where you've cut the movie, and visual effects are usually the last shots to come in. They get that last visual effects shot in. You sit down, you watch the movie once. They ask you if it's okay, and then it gets shipped. Immediately
just like
afterwards. So it's kind of, you're exhausted. You finally, at that point, you're not objective anymore at all. But you're checking it for any kind of technical things, and then it's shipped off around the world, and that's how it lives forever. I've been lucky on both of the movies I've done that after the kind of release and the press tour is over, I get to go back, watch the movie again, and do any kind of little tweaks I want to do for a Blu-ray release, which is always nice to kind of get a little distance from it.
Right. A director's cut, for example?
Well, not really an editorial. You can't really do an editorial change, but you can do stuff to the mix. You can fix a couple little things in the picture. Okay. It's always interesting to watch it with an audience and see which parts people are missing or getting, lines and things like that. You can always fix and do some fun stuff for Blu-ray. Like, on Oblivion, we did a music-only version of the film, which was kind of cool. Okay. So you can just watch, listen to the score and watch the film. And,
that's great.
Little things like that. Yeah.
Right. So actually, with the 4K distribution, we are doing 4K DCPs, and Sony Pictures is one of the studios on the forefront of releasing theatrical in 4K. So it's great. The experience is considerably better than the 2K. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Oh, man, that's a long list. I've been very lucky so far working with Jeff Bridges and Tom Cruise and Morgan Freeman. So I've already worked with some big legends. Growing up as a kid, Indiana Jones was always one of my favorite. It was probably my top films. So I think Harrison Ford might be one of those that would be amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I would say you've got to make something. You've got, no one will hire you to be a director unless you've already proven it yourself. So you've got to go out and make that short, that fake commercial, whatever it is. You've got to make something that expresses who you are and what your point of view is. So no one's going to pay you to do it. You're going to have to do it on your own. But the technology that's available today with digital cameras and editing software and 3D, it's amazing what you can do by yourself if you have to, or with some friends. Make that short and put it out there, and if it gets noticed, great. If not, then go make another one.
And keep doing it, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're going to hear no a lot in this industry. You hear it, 10 times as much as you hear yes. So you just got to get used to that cycle, keep creating, and if you make something good, it will get noticed, and you'll get that call.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much,
Great.
Joe. Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Pleasure.